Welcome to Batya on NewsNation. I'm Batya, and we begin with what we learned about America this week. On Friday, the Nobel Committee in Oslo did what everyone expected them to do. They refused to award Donald Trump the Nobel Peace Prize. It was, as my people would call it, a shanda, an absolute disgrace. The prize was announced just 36 hours after the president secured a peace deal to release all of the remaining hostages in Hamas captivity in Gaza. It was an astonishing feat, celebrated both in the streets of Gaza and in the streets of Tel Aviv and beyond.
Blessed be the peacemakers.
God bless you, Mr. President. God bless America.
Thank you very much. You just take care of yourselves. The hostages will come back. They're all coming back on Monday.
We'll make Israel great again.
Just consider for a minute what it takes to end a war and to have both sides hail you as a hero. Consider the resistance Trump had to overcome on both sides. From Israel's side, you had Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has resisted calls to end the war since it began, at times even calls from the majority of Israelis. He was put in the unenviable position of navigating the dual imperatives of the war, bringing back the hostages on the one hand and putting an end to Hamas on the other. And these were always in conflict with each other, a horrific Sophie's choice. Netanyahu seemed to have chosen finishing Hamas over rescuing hostages. It took President Trump, who together with First Lady Melania was deeply moved by the plight of the hostage families, to tell Netanyahu in no uncertain terms that the time had come to choose the hostages and to end the war. And this truly was no easy feat. Netanyahu has for decades outmaneuvered American presidents, resisting their pressure and enraging them in the process. But Trump had two advantages. His own popularity in Israel no doubt made Netanyahu hesitant to cross him. And Trump also knew that the Israeli people were ready for the war to be over. 2/3 of Israelis, the highest number since the war began, want it to end. Moreover, Trump has been bothered by Israel's loss of support, both stateside and worldwide. Trump saw the deal as a way of bringing Israel back into the fold amidst cratering support. And as he proudly explained it on Fox News on Wednesday,
it's brought the whole world together. It's amazing. I've never seen anything. It's so good for Israel. I spoke to Bibi Netanyahu just a little while ago. He called. He said, "I can't believe it." He said, "Everybody's liking me now." Meaning him. He said, I said, more importantly, they're loving Israel again. And they really are. I said, Israel cannot fight the world, Bibi. They can't fight the world. And he understands that very well. So it's amazing the way it's all come together, and it's a beautiful picture. It's a lot of talent involved, I'll tell you, but there was a certain degree of luck, too. You know, you need luck also.
None of this is to say that Trump doesn't understand the threat of Hamas or was sanguine about a deal that didn't neuter the terrorist organization. But while conventional wisdom cast Hamas as a military problem, Trump began to see it as a diplomatic one. If he could get Qatar and Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Turkey to take responsibility for Gaza and for getting rid of the threat posed by the terrorist group, then the second imperative of the war, ending Hamas, could be similarly accomplished just by different means. By reframing Hamas not as a military problem of Israel's, but as a diplomatic problem of the Arabs, Trump found a way to align what were the competing imperatives of the war. And when Bibi balked at the terms of the deal, Trump was adamant, take the win. So how did Trump get the Arabs on board? Well, there are 3 rules to Trump's deal-making. Ignore the experts, align the interests of the two sides, and play the long game, pivoting when necessary and taking that win whenever you can. In this case, he ignored the conventional wisdom that the conflict is about competing value systems and that what the Muslim countries want more than anything else is an end to Israel. Instead, Trump focused on the fact that the Muslim states in play each wanted something from him. Egypt wanted American military aid and for the Gazans to stay put in Gaza and not flood Sinai. Qatar wanted an apology from Netanyahu for an Israeli airstrike, and Turkey wanted sanctions relief. Most importantly, Trump had convinced the Gulf Arab states in an early trip to the region that he respected them and had their best interests at heart, despite his avowed and unapologetically pro-Israel stance. While bragging about being the most pro-Israel president in American history, Trump courted trillions of dollars in investments to intertwine our economies with those of the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, and used tariffs to incentivize those investments going to our industrial base. In other words, Trump's economic agenda and his foreign policy agenda are intertwined, something the president himself acknowledged.
The tariffs have brought peace to the world. I'm telling you, they brought peace to the world, and not only here, but with so many other deals. You know, I've made 7 peace deals, at least 5 of the 7 that we've done so far. It was through trade, that we're not going to deal with people that fight. We're not going to deal, and we're going to put tariffs on you. It gives you a tremendous road to peace and the saving of millions of lives.
It was vintage Trump. Why he is the only person who could have pulled this peace deal off, saving the lives of 20 Israeli hostages and probably thousands of Gazans. It's peace through strength, and rather than costing the American taxpayer, it is built on investment in the U.S. This is what a foreign policy designed for the American middle class looks like. A president who ends wars and brings home the bacon in one grand scheme to enrich the American people, economically, diplomatically, and nationally. And he was no bystander. I'm told by sources close to the president that he was deeply involved in setting the parameters of the peace deal. There's only one way to feel in a moment like this: immense pride as Americans at what our president has accomplished for humanity. How can this person not have been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize? Resentment, it's the only answer, the same kind that engulfs the Democrats, equally unable to give him the credit he deserves. Never mind, the Nobel Committee just solidified its irrelevance. Peace, of course, is its own reward. Here to discuss further is Steve Bannon, former White House chief strategist and host of War Room. Steve, welcome so much, and thank you for being here.
Batya, I think that is the single best analysis and assessment I have heard in all the words that are out there, all the different channels. Quite brilliant, really brilliant. One thing I just want to add to that, I want to make sure that Jared Kushner and Witkoff get also the due credit there. They are, and I want to go back in time. If you look at this as a continuum of President Trump and how he thinks, I think this starts to make more sense. The underpinnings of this are commercial relationships and actually building middle class and working class throughout the world, in this case, in the Middle East. If you go back to our very first trip in May of 2017, of which, by the way, you remember Qatar was kind of odd man out because they wouldn't step forward and really do what UAE, Saudis working with us about terror financing. But the whole underpinning of that was a new dawn to kind of put the politics aside for a second, and let's look at the economic vitality of the region, particularly post oil. You know, what's the region going to do? How's it going to expand? And Israel as a potential technology partner. Then you have the Abraham Accords. Jared's kind of the architect of that for President Trump. The Abraham Accords is essentially not a political deal. It's an economic deal. It tries to integrate the commercial relationships, the jet flights, the capital markets, trade in the region. And I think this is one of the reasons that it never really got, first it was President Trump, obviously, but the diplomatic and kind of political people that write about this don't really understand it. It's more of a business deal, the way Jared had always thought of it. Then you cut to the first trip in the spring to the Gulf Emirates, to Saudi Arabia and to Qatar, and also the UAE. All of that was about building commercial relationships between the United States and the Gulf Emirates, but also the potential that we could have peace. And if we had peace, we have broader commercial relations. That is what's underpinning this deal today. It's really that, the Palestinians are not going to leave. There's going to be a massive redevelopment. The Arab nations, the Gulf Emirates, essentially putting up the money. The Turkey and others are going to provide the security. So I think if you look at his commercial relationships, this has a beginning with President Trump and how he thinks, and Jared Kushner, who I think Jared is really the unspoken hero and back President Trump and really working on this. It's quite brilliant. Now, that being said, particularly those of us that have been friends of Israel for many, many decades and have really fought a two-state solution, I think we have to face reality. What's happening in Gaza, I think, is the beginning of the proto-Palestinian or Arab state. The Gulf Emirates are essentially going to finance it. There may be some interim, 200 American troops to do some sort of coordination from CENTCOM, but eventually Turkey and others are going to be there. There's also blocked any more expansion or really the historic claim of Israel on Judea Samaria. That looks like it's going to be blocked. So I think it was a overplay by Netanyahu, and we are where we are, but obviously historic. And I think if you take it from the business perspective, the commercial perspective, he essentially took the power of the hands of the politicians, put it in the hands of the business people, and I think you're going to get peace. What I found most striking today of everything, you had people in the streets dancing, a very moving press conference or press briefing by the IDF, who I think are also been the unspoken heroes here. What they had to go through in this war against the Hamas, or what I call the Muslim Brotherhood fighting brigades. The actual spokesman, I think today, actually broke down in tears, talking about, and this shows you how tough they've had this fight and how they were not looking forward to going back in there and doing what they're requested to do. And this is why I think the head of the IDF and Netanyahu came to loggerheads over the last 3 or 4 months. But when the soldiers of the IDF are in back of a deal and they have a spokesman that's in tears, I think that shows you how deep an issue this was and why both Israeli citizens and the Palestinians in the whole region and the world are celebrating Donald J. Trump. He's the only person that can pull this off.
One of the things that I mentioned in the editorial was how important this was for Trump in terms of restoring Israel to having support, both worldwide and in America. Among young people, support for Israel has really been cratering. I want to play you something the president said about Israel. Let's have SOT 1.
No president in history has been a greater friend of the state of Israel than I have. History has shown us that those who have relations with Israel have thrived, while those who have devoted resources and attention toward the destruction and even annihilation of Israel have languished. They haven't done well. Israel is not going anywhere.
So President Trump has really been at the forefront of making the argument that there's no conflict between being America first and being pro-Israel. He's very proud of his sort of pro-Israel bona fides. There is an emerging split among right-wing influencers on this question. Where do you fall on this? Do you feel that there's a conflict between being America first and being pro-Israel? And is the future GOP a pro-Israel party?
Let me give you a definition. By the way, I think the most important thing that he said to Netanyahu, because let's be blunt, Ron Dermer, Ambassador Dermer, who is a great guy and I know quite well, I'm think very highly of him, and Bibi at the end were not in the room, not in the deal. They really weren't looking for input from it, and that should be the Israeli people and the Jewish people in the United States to really embrace that. What happened at the end of this deal to make it happen? Dermer went to the resort, the Red Sea resort, but really wasn't a big part of the final negotiations. Bibi was not part of the final negotiation. The president told Bibi he can't take on the world. And what he meant by that is that we're not going to be dragged into this as you take on the world. There's a huge difference between being America first and pro-Israel and being Israel first. And I have been I have a long history of being very pro-Israel, and particularly being a two-state solution, Israel's historic claim to Judea Samaria, and other aspects of it. But what happened here is you had the commentators and the folks who I call Israel first, that put Israel, and particularly Netanyahu, not really Israel, put Netanyahu's political situation at the forefront. And I think this came to a head over the Persian, or I say the Iranian situation, which we now know from the Times of Israel and detailed analysis of the war cabinet meetings. It was 2 years before they got a bomb. This is coming from the war cabinet as they made a decision on that night. And we kept saying that this was all a sense of urgency that didn't need to be there. I think you start to see a split right there between the America first and what I call the Israel first. And I would tell my Jewish friends, and I would tell people in Israel, I said, under 35 years old, you almost have no support right now, zero support. And a big, huge part of that is, as you know, Batya, you and I have talked about it, this progressive takeover of the universities, which is not anti-Semitic, it is Jew hatred, right? And make it very difficult for Jewish people here in the United States. So we have a massive problem. I gave a speech at NatCon. And in that speech at NatCon, I said, look, if you love Israel, if you support Israel and you support the Jewish people, the problem that we have right now is not in Tehran. The problem you have right now is in the streets of New York, where you have Zohran, who is a neo-Marxist jihadist with all types of money through his parents. We have no idea where this money's coming from. It's going to be, he's Sadiq Khan on testosterone. And to prove that, what happened on October 7th in the streets of New York, which the mainstream media has not reported, but War Room did, there was a orgy of hatred against Israel and the Jewish people that took place all the evening of October 7th on the second anniversary of the horrific attack. And you saw, I tell you, you saw what New York City is going to turn into. And so if people love Israel, if you support the Jewish people, people are to start getting focused on what the problem is. The problem is London is coming to New York City. And after November 4th, when Zohran wins, we're going to have hell to pay. It's going to be a inflection point in American history.
We have much more to talk about. We have to take a short break, but we will be right back after this. Welcome back to the show. Back with us is Steve Bannon, former White House chief strategist and host of War Room. Steve, you more than anybody expanded the definition of what it means to be a Republican, who could belong to the MAGA movement. I myself, of course, was very much the beneficiary of that. You made it clear that this could be a home for Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Jewish Americans, Democrats, gay Americans, pro-choice people. I guess my question to you is, are there limits? Are there people who you would say, you are not part of this movement, you are not welcome here?
Well, I think, and it's kind of, I don't determine that, but I think it's this whole movement's kind of self-organizing. I think that people are attracted to it, see certain common values. As you know, Batya, we have a lot of Democrats, particularly younger Democrats, I think are looking for a home. I think particularly as the Democratic Party escalates goes up the escalatory ladder in violence, I think we're even going to get more people. I think from the last election, you saw working class African Americans and Hispanics, and particularly a lot of men, because of the anti-male agenda or the toxic masculinity as purported by the Democratic Party. It's kind of self-organizing. I think, listen, so far, I think we've done great. I think the President Trump movement. Now, I would say my only difference in what you just said, I'm not so sure they're in the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. I think they vote for President Trump. They're MAGA, and they identify MAGA as President Trump. And this is why I am adamant in working on Trump 28. Someone like President Trump comes along, once every 100 years. We've had General Washington, we've had at the birth of the nation, we've had President Lincoln at the rebirth of the nation, and we've had President Trump at the rejuvenation and reclaiming the nation. And so I think we have not solved. We're still the low propensity voter party. When we win, we turn out low propensity voters, and particularly people who are what I call low information voters. Not that they're not smart, they're just not that engaged in politics, right? But they see in a message of MAGA and they see in a message of President Trump something that will get them to the polls. And so I would say we're open to all as people come in, and I don't determine this. Even President Trump doesn't determine it. So but we'll have to see. And there's always going to be skirmishes between people, what I call inter-squad scrimmages. all the time, and that's what political parties are made of. But I think as an organic whole, we happen to be growing, and I think in the Democratic Party, particularly as the Democratic Party becomes more violent and more kind of almost obscure in what they're fighting for. I shouldn't say obscure, it's the wrong word. They become kind of weirder policies, but more intense policies that are clearly anti-American. And you see, more things you see like what happened in New York City on October 7th and who they're holding up, the Luigi Mangionis, the Zohrans. I think the more you see of this, the fight to remove illegal alien invaders from the country in Chicago and Portland and others, the more embracing of Antifa, I think we'll get more working class people to our side that are looking for the economic benefits of the American economy.
So let me ask you about Trump 2028. We have a 22nd Amendment, which bars anybody from running for a third term. Do you think that that's not a barrier for him, or how do you see that?
I think that there are many different alternatives that at the appropriate time after the midterms in 26, we will roll out. But I think there are many different alternatives to make sure that President Trump is on the ballot. And if he's on the ballot, he'll win. So I think there's many different alternatives. Remember, people said back in the interregnum that President Trump, what was it, the immunity situation, trying to kick him off the ballot in Colorado, other things about presidential immunity, what he had done and some of the acts. People said we were going to lose at the Supreme Court. I think both of those we won 9-0. I think the Supreme Court has Roberts Court in looking at President Trump's. I think his interpretation of the real powers, or I call the expanded powers, of the chief executive, both the office of the president, chief executive, commander in chief, and also the chief magistrate and chief law enforcement officer. I believe that the Supreme Court's sending a very strong signal that it's reversing what the Warren Court tried to do in staying out of what they call political issues. I believe this will be deemed to be a political issue and worked out accordingly. But I fully intend to see President Trump on the ballot in 2028 and to return to office as to continue the great run he's had as 47th president of the United States. Like I said, you know this better than anybody. If you've seen the Herculean task that he has done in the Middle East and particularly in Gaza and Israel, that seemed like it was intractable to really solve what's 50, 60, 70, 80 years of hostility to get people to work together, that only comes along once every couple of hundred years. And it's very important, I think, for us as a nation to keep President Trump as the chief executive officer and the commander in chief.
But you would support that in the context of legal means, correct?
Well, yeah. I mean, you have to. It's going to have to be legal, right? It's going to have to be legal. I don't know of any illegal means. I don't think there's any illegal means that you could actually do that the American people support. And this has to be supported by a broad spectrum of the American people. Remember, President Trump won the popular vote. I actually think when you look at the real numbers and take away some of the noise, I think he's more popular than ever. And look, you just saw, I mean, it's kind of a joke on the Nobel Prize. Of course, the progressives are never going to give Trump the Nobel Prize. Well, but here's the reason is that the situation in Venezuela, the woman who I'm a huge supporter. She's very brave, standing up to Maduro and these guys. And I'm not for a military interdiction into Venezuela at all, but she doesn't exist as an entity unless you really have President Trump and the umbrella that President Trump, the space that President Trump is giving her to actually be the next potential leader in Venezuela. So, I mean, the whole Nobel Prize thing's a joke. Most people understand that. Look, you know the situation better than anybody. Look at the joy that is in Gaza and in Israel today. Look at that. That is, nobody in my generation or whatever has ever seen anything. The outpouring of tears, of hugs, of people saying we could go forward. And like I said, when you see the IDF, who are tough as boot leather, when you see a spokesman come up and really have tears in their eyes because the war is finally over, right? That shows you that a figure like Donald Trump, he's a world historical figure.
I could not
this
agree
is the
with
age
you
of
more
Trump,
about
and
that.
I just think we have to play. I think we have to play it out.
Last question: if the legal avenue towards repealing the 22nd or getting him on the ballot fails,
I never said repeal the 22nd Amendment. I said I think there are many alternatives. Many alternatives.
If those alternatives,
I don't think the American people would ever support someone that they didn't think it was in the customs and tradition and or legal, if you're definite, what your definition of legal is. But like I said, if you watch MSNBC, you watch CNN, their interpretation of how the highest court's going to interpret the Constitution is not just wrong, it's dead wrong. If you look at President Trump and what he has done in the Article 2 powers of being the chief executive, of being the the commander in chief, and repelling the invasion, and particularly being the chief magistrate and chief law enforcement officer. I mean, Russ Vought announced today by Twitter, he's beginning the rifts on the administrative state, okay? That is not, all these people that said what was legal and everything like that, so I think that the definition...
If this effort fails, will you consider running for president in 2028?
No, I'm, as you know, I'm not a politician. No, I am fully 100%. I'm a Trump guy here, and we're going to pull it off. The nation needs President Trump. The world needs President Trump. In the streets of Gaza, what has been a horrific 2-year, from the worst slaughter against the Jews since the Holocaust to the bloodshed that's taken place, the loss of life of the IDF and the Palestinians, it's been a horror show. And President Trump has brought joy to the streets on a hard-headed, tough business deal. And so the world needs this guy more than ever, and the country needs this guy more than ever. And so I am spending every waking moment to make sure we got him.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bannon. God bless you and protect you. Ahead, a California Democratic hopeful does not like having to answer tough questions or really any questions at all.
I don't want to keep doing this. I'm going to call it. Thank you.
You're not going to do the interview with us?
Nope, not like this. I'm not. Not with 7 follow-ups to every single question you ask.
We've also asked the other candidates, do you think you need any of those 40% of California voters to win? And you're saying, no, you don't.
No, I'm saying I'm going to try to win every vote I can. And what I'm saying to you is that...
Well, to those voters, okay, so you...
I don't want to keep doing this. I'm going to call it. Okay. Thank you.
You're not going to do the interview with us?
Nope, not like this. I'm not. Not with 7 follow-ups to every single question you ask.
That is former Democratic Congresswoman and current California gubernatorial candidate Katie Porter trying to end an interview early, horrified at the prospect of having to answer questions from a journalist. But this is not the first time we have seen Porter lash out during an interview. Watch what happened in 2021 when a staffer accidentally entered her shot during an interview.
And the state could lose. Get out of my shot.
I wanted to tell you that that's actually incorrect. It's not that it's electric vehicles. It's that if we don't meet the commitments under the Paris Climate Accord.
Okay, it does. Okay, you also were in my shot before that. Stay out of my shot.
Could these outbursts cost Porter the shot at being the next governor of California? She is the former White House press officer and chief of staff Democratic strategist Yemisi Egbiwole, and she is a political strategist and senior fellow at Frontiers of Freedom, Scotty Nell Hughes. Ladies, welcome. Thank you both so much for being here. Yemisi, let's start with you. What was your first reaction to seeing these clips?
Not surprising. I used to work on the Hill, so I really wasn't surprised. I'm glad other folks are catching up. One thing I will note is she spoke in such a sharp tone to that staffer, and the staffer did not flinch. So it wasn't the first time that had clearly happened, but the first time on camera.
Scotty, is there a bigger story here, or is this just a person who treats her staff very poorly and is very used to not being asked challenging questions by journalists?
Well, let me take this from a bigger picture. From Female in Politics, she gives us a very bad name and just aids into the stereotype that women are chaotic and they can't handle pressure. And let's just say this, if she can't handle questions without storming off an interview, imagine her in a crisis situation in California. And anybody that's followed the headlines the past year, California is a state that is known for having crises, both economic and natural disasters. So you need to have somebody who can handle a calm head. And she has multiple times demonstrated she's more about going viral than actually giving substance and real answers to problems.
I mean, Yemisi, there is sometimes a double standard on women. I'm sure all three of us have experienced that. Do you think that comes into play here at all, or is this just a very nasty person?
You know what? I used to work for Senator Amy Klobuchar, and I'm sure lots of people can have a separate conversation about the stories around her. But I always thought nobody's begging you to work on the Hill. There's 100 applications for each job, and they are tough jobs. I do think sometimes women can get an unfair rap. But to go back to what Scotty said, I mean, she sat in an interview and couldn't do any follow-up questions. And I think in this time, as Democrats are looking to the midterms and also to 2028, we can't have leading Democratic candidates that aren't willing to come up with solutions and answers to pull in voters that they haven't convinced yet. And also, California has a deep Democratic bench. I mean, Xavier Becerra is also running. He used to be the district attorney there. He was in Congress for many years. She doesn't have to be the hill we all die on. She had such a poor performance in this interview. She's the front runner, and it's okay if she makes her way a little bit to the back on this.
Scotty, I wonder if you, like I, had a reaction to where it was like, these Democrats totally expect the media to be on their side. Like, she was so shocked to be asked a follow-up question, which is like totally normal part of the process of being interviewed. Do you think this also revealed a double standard in how the media treats Democrats?
Well, as a conservative, I'm supposed to say yes, but let me just point out that I think you're seeing it on both sides. I'm supposed to say yes, but
no, we love somebody who breaks from the mold.
Absolutely. I think this is what's missing in journalism today is we are not supposed to just ask one follow-up. I appreciate and respect that reporter for asking 7, continuing to hold these politicians' feet to the fire, regardless of the aisle they're on. And if you cannot handle it, you should not be in office, because these reporters are supposed to be acting like the people and what the people want to know. And I think this shows that yes, maybe Democrats might have had a softer hand in the past, especially when we're dealing with the White House. On the other hand, though, when it gets to local politics, I think these local reporters have a more direct byline to the people. And so they're getting it. If they don't ask the questions of these elected officials or people who want to be in these offices, they're the ones that get the hate emails. They're the ones that have to answer the people. So I think these local reporters, bravo for continuing to hold the local officials' feet to the fire.
Scotty Nell Hughes and Yemisi Egbiwole, stay with us, because up next we are going to be talking about 2 New Yorkers going head-to-head in the halls of Congress, and I want to get your take on this.
Did your boss Donald Trump?
You can easily extend the ACA
Did your
right
boss
now.
Donald Trump
He's
give
not
you
my
permission?
boss.
Yes, he is.
No, he's not. And by the way,
so let me ask you a
why
question.
did you vote to
Let me
shut
ask
the
you a
government
question.
down?
You
Why
know
did you vote to shut it down?
Let me ask you a question.
For years, you always
Well,
lectured about how we need to keep the government open.
You're making a show of this to
No,
make
it's
yourself
sad.
relevant.
It's sad. You could easily sign on to
You're
this.
embarrassing
You
yourself
could
right
sign
now.
on. We got a 1-year extension. Why
Yeah,
don't we
did
sign
you-
on right
let
now?
me ask you a question. Did you
Why don't we sign
get
on right
permission
now?
from your boss?
Why don't we sign on right now?
Did your boss Donald Trump?
You can easily extend
Did
the
your
ACA
Did your
right
boss
now.
Donald Trump
He's
give
not
you
my
permission?
boss.
Yes, he is.
No, he's not. And by the way,
So let me ask you a
why
question.
did you vote to
Let me
shut
ask
the
you a
government
question.
down?
You
Why
know
did you vote to shut it
Let
down?
me ask you a question.
For years, you always
Well,
lectured about how we need to keep the government open.
You're making a show of this to
No,
make
it's
yourself
sad.
relevant.
It's sad. You could easily sign on to this.
You're embarrassing yourself
You could
right
sign
now.
on to this. The only
You're
embarrassment
chasing
here is
clout.
you.
You're an embarrassment.
You could sign on to the bill.
Let me ask you a question.
You have 4 Democrats on here.
Let me
Why
ask you a
won't you
question.
sign on
Let me ask
to
you a
it?
question.
It's a clean
Let me ask
extension
you a
for 1
question.
year.
You voted for the one big
Clean
ugly bill,
extension.
correct?
I voted for a
The
tax cut
largest-
bill that gave the largest tax cut
the
to
largest-
Americans in history,
the
including, by
largest-
the way, the average New Yorker getting a $4,000 tax cut. Are you against that?
You're embarrassing
Do you
yourself right
you want
now.
to cut the standard deduction in
The
half? Is that
largest
what you
cut
wanted
to
to do?
Medicaid in
No, we
American
voted
history.
out
You
waste
voted for that.
That was New York Republican Mike Lawler confronting fellow New York Congressman and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries over the shutdown. The clip had everything: grandstanding for the cameras, useless bickering, talking points aimed at the deepest depths of the base. It was a real sign of the times. Let's bring in Yemisi Egbiwole and Scotty Nell Hughes to react. Yemisi, let me start with you. Isn't this what the American people just absolutely hate about our government right now?
Yeah, I mean, polling shows that the shutdown isn't working for either side at this moment. And I know there's pressure on Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries to kind of show some really strong leadership. And look, I would never want to follow Nancy Pelosi in anything. So he definitely has to perform a little bit and show some strength here. But I just don't know if this Jeffries-Lawler act is really going to move polling or belief on either side for their constituencies. But it's great to see New York politics in action.
Scotty, what was your reaction to this clip? Do you think either of them came off better than the other?
I feel like I'm watching an episode from The Real Housewives of Capitol Hill, and both of the guys deserve Emmys for their performances. Let me just point it out. I mean, maybe a little bit more hair pulling if they both had hair. Listen, both of these guys, they accomplished what they wanted. They showed to their bases that they are angry and they're upset with the other party, and they pointed the fingers at each other. But as you actually point out, Batya, this is what the American people hate right now about the shutdown, about what's happening in Washington, D.C. There are real issues now starting to happen on the grassroots, out in Main Street, being felt by this shutdown, whether you're at the airports, whether you were talking about services being offered. There's some real issues as we go on to week 2 about this. And our government, I think that both the House and the Senate do not deserve their paychecks and they need to stay right there and do their job, because that's what you and I would have to do if we were in the same situation.
Yeah, Missy, how do we get out of this? I mean, everybody is so locked into their corners. You can only control your own side, you know? I mean, we can only really control ourselves. But what would your message be to politicians, media people, about how we claw our way out of this depolarization of our elites?
I mean, I would tell them that there's a reason that this Congress is polling at historic levels for elected officials. And I'd point out that, look, the impacts of this are about to hit everyday people. I mean, they're not even going to be able to catch flights out of Washington. They might actually be forced to stay here. If those essential workers, like the folks who work at TSA and our air traffic controllers, decide to be pencils down and not show up to work, there are folks whose day-to-day lives are dependent on some kind of bipartisan agreement. And if they cannot see and feel the hurt of it, then maybe the air traffic controller should take a day off from the Reagan National Airport and let them stay in Washington and figure it out.
Scotty, how does the shutdown end? Is there an end in sight? What do you envision in the coming week about how this ends?
Well, let me just point out that historically there's been shutdowns that have happened when both Republicans and Democrats have been in power, and they've either really hurt going into the midterms or they've helped. I think it's going to be depending on what actually can be the result from it. You know, the Republican stance is you have to pass a clean bill. It's something that's all they're asking, and that's what a lot of Americans don't understand why that's such a hard decision to make. So it's all going to be about the messaging, which I happen to disagree. I think the Republicans are winning on this front because the reality of it is our base doesn't like the government working. We think the federal government should be shut down and give more power back to the states. So as long as that continues, this actually works good for the Republicans and a much needed boost going into the midterms.
Scotty Nell Hughes and Yemisi Egbiwole, thank you both so much. That was really fun. Coming up, what I would like to see from both parties in the week ahead as polarization reigns supreme. We began the show with what we learned about America this week, and we end it with what we're looking toward next week. On Sunday, the president will travel to the Middle East, visiting Egypt and Israel, where he will address the Israeli Knesset. And while he didn't win the Nobel Prize, world leaders from the UK to India have congratulated the president on the first phase of this crucial and historic deal. Not so with the Democrats. Those who did acknowledge the deal, like former President Barack Obama, did so without mentioning President Trump by name, as if the deal had just materialized out of the ether. It's pathetic, but also, let's be honest, if the tables were turned and a deal like this came about a year ago, would Republicans be thanking President Biden? Of course they wouldn't be. We have a problem in this country. The elites, especially in politics and the media, have gotten used to consolidating power through polarization, petty squabbling, vindictive grudges. That is what I am looking for in the next week. As the shutdown drags on, who can find common ground? Find a kind word for the political opposition. Give credit where credit is due. That is the only way forward. Thank you all so much for joining me today. It's been an honor. May God bless and protect you and the United States of America.